thank you. Thank you, John. And I'm going to begin like I begin most of my dialogues, really, by apologising. So I'm sorry. So I'll just get that out the way. I'm sorry I'm not Jackie Dillon. I'm sorry I'm not even a reasonable facsimile of Jack and Dillon. I'm just plain sorry. Okay? So let's get that out the way. And the other thing I'm going to say that I'm sorry for the people who do not speak Maori, okay? Because what I'm going to do now is do a very brief introduction in Maori, okay? And for people who English is their second language, this would be the closest thing to a nightmare as what you will ever experience, okay? So if you will just bear with me as I hopefully give a blessing on these proceedings, if I can. Right, okay. So, tihi mariora, mihi na nui kai katoa e tēnei rā, tēnā koutou mau tautoko, o te kaupapa e te rena, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I've done my best to translate into English. Maori is a spoken language, not a written language, so you don't really get the richness, to be perfectly honest. But hopefully it's the appropriate way for us to start. Right. So, the theme of the conference is real change. And I confess, I now sit in the day room, the atrium, okay, of where I work, and at Auckland University, and wonder if I haven't just swapped one large institution for another. Certainly the architecture is different. The previous Gothic style, both impressive and imposing, built to reflect the grandeur and totality of our colonial masters. It was also indicative of the level of control and isolation from our society, a very tangible statement of power over its inhabitants by the services of the day. A monarchy of its own designed, with appointed king and queen, noblemen and women, and we were the subjects. The buildings are relics not only of our colonial past, but also the feudal system which subjugated certain members of our society while privileging others. Where you were placed on the social spectrum was determined by a small but elite group of health professionals. A number of features contributed to how someone was commissioned to their status. Some factors were preordained, whilst others a matter of pure chance or grave misfortune. As with any monarchy, there was absolute power, and with it, the power to reconsign its subjects, but there was little probability of any person to raise above the rank of mad person, and that seemed a title acquisitioned for life. But even in this most incredibly controlled environment, or perhaps because of it, I was witness to acts of rebellion. There were a few amongst the dynasty who clearly did not know their place or were unwilling to be limited by such yokes of oppression. These included staff and clients. I remember the activists, for they engaged in acts of defiance. I call them activists because they were driven by their conscience and the unusual belief into action. These were the ones who didn't talk as much as they listened. They actually bothered to listen to clients, and they listened with genuine interest and concern. These were the ones who didn't shy away when we spoke to and of our madness. They listened and puzzled, curious of its origins, even assuming there was an origin, which was a radical notion. They were not convinced it was just a surge of neurochemicals into the brain. It seemed to them too much of a coincidence that terrible things had happened to people, and also having the misfortune to be stricken with a mental disorder. How unlucky can any person be? The fact that something had happened to people rather than there being something wrong with them was a very abstract concept. These anomalies formed a connection between us and a need to make some sort of sense of what was being said. Careful not to impose their interpretations, slowly teasing out the relevant bits of a scattered and perplexing puzzle. Skillfully, they held snippets of information and then took the time and trouble to help me rearrange them into a siphonable and comprehensible message that chronicled my shattered life. I got to weep openly with those who allowed it. I sobbed, not because of the content, but simply from relief, from the opportunity to give voice to all that had brought me here, all that had become locked inside, fermenting and growing into a mass of cancerous thoughts. I sobbed from the sheer physical force of those painful memories leaving my body. Some were even brave enough to embrace me, to allow me to drench their shoulders with healing tears. I cannot describe to you the sense of liberation, redemption, and human warmth I experienced during these fleeting moments. It was one of those moments that remain with you forever. I can still feel that bony shoulder and being wrapped in the sweetest of embraces. One that came from a compassionate and unselfish heart, from someone who in that instance truly cared. It was one of the most courageous acts of subversion, touch, to embrace a person, what appears to be the most natural of all human responses to distress, termed unprofessional conduct. The simple act of humanity condemned in action we still debate and deliberate and vilify even today. These were spontaneous responses to be in the presence of a fellow human being who desperately trying to come to terms with the injustices and unrealised dreams of a fractured life. I could never reconcile the notion that when I was ordained as a mad person, I resigned from all those fundamental requirements of a human being. I became this thing, this non-person, a subnormal. I'm sorry to say I forgot to relinquish my need for meaningful relationships, my wish to be held, for affection, to be liked, to feel valued and regarded, to communicate and to matter to someone. It only had to be one person, just someone. The desire for acceptance and inclusion are universal quests. These were the things I wasn't informed of. There were no intensive discussions of the consequences of being who others said I was. I just had to get on living with the magnitude of being nothing. This is one of the more negative impacts of institutions. There is no or little room for individuality. They are, by their very nature, a place of conformity, rigidity, and uniformity. That is how they are comprised. And change of any sort seems far too laborious and complex, and the effects of change are slow to manifest. Change need not be so convoluted. It is us who have made it so. For institutions and their machinations are not conscious beings. It is people who create the systems, objectives and philosophies of an institution. Assertions that I can't practice the way I want to because of the system and it won't allow me draw little sympathy from me. If that is the case, then challenge it. Bring it to the table, debate with peers, open the discussions, amass your allies, contest and feed back. Employ those problem-solving skills you impart so expertly to service users and raise it and raise it and raise it again until it changes. The mental institutions of the past, with their massive stonework construction, gave such an air of permanence, symbolising the perpetual confinement of the inhabitants, but also the permanence of their designated role within the structure. But ultimately, they changed. They disappeared. Few of us who entered ever truly believed we would leave, but we did. Unfortunately, not because we were considered able, not because our family wished to reclaim us, but because quite simply it was too expensive to keep us there. Now suddenly we had the fortitude and rationale and logic to allow us to dismantle this indomitable machine. Sadly, in the end, it was not from any sense of social justice, not motivated by noble deeds or greater aspirations for the inhabitants. It was purely based on financial considerations. Whilst we closed the institutions, fundamentally things did not change. We just went to smaller buildings and called it community care. With the protocols and processes, in fact, in some instances, they were more restrictive and draconian than what I had previously experienced. There we were, to be unleashed onto an unsuspecting public, totally unprepared and ill-equipped to deal with this new domain, thrust onto a community that was not inclined to interact with us, nor wish to extend a welcome. We were to face the condemnation and wrath of those whom we so long wished to live amongst. Our humiliation and our othering was overt and cloaked with shame. We retreated to create our own community, supporting and protecting our fellow nutters from the inhumane and invalidating treatment we so often fall victim to. We became to each other all that we wanted from those outside of our dominion. We exemplified, I believe, the better virtues of human capacity, those of kindness, tolerance, and unconditional love, with a genuine sense of reciprocity, for it was given and received based on need. Our so-called high and complex needs proved to be nothing more than the desire to be loved and befriended. I, like many others, was forced to exist in this imposed world that I was so unprepared for, and I manoeuvred and positioned myself to achieve invisibility. I had discovered that that was the best tactic while in the institutions. It kept my madness firmly intact. Escaping via your thinking becomes a sensual process and denies the brutality of this real world. My mad world, so much more alluring than what was on offer. I learnt the technique well in the institutions, and things appeared no different out in the community. I just had to adapt to a new antagonist. Maladaptive coping strategies, I think is the term. Survival technique is what I called it. To remain salvageable, I had to find ways to protect and nourish those fragile, authentic parts of myself so I would be able to emerge when the time was right. Amongst all this disillusionment, I never actually lost hope that things could be different. I just didn't know how to instigate it. Hope is a hard thing to kill, and buried deep inside this troubled and overactive mind were great vaults of unexpressed wisdom and optimism. I developed my own language, a language to preserve the best parts of me, to help me endure. I speak this language sometimes, the language of madness. What you are hearing is the expression of abandonment and loneliness and confusion and distress and fear and persecution and abuse, for this is what culminates into this language of madness. It is, I suggest, the words given to express intolerable pain. So don't defile the second language of mine by labelling it symptomatic. This is a profanity. This is a language of pure desperation, directed by fear of being truly lost forever. Not dying, for we have no fear of that. What we fear is the loss of our uniqueness, our precious minds. This language is neither refined nor eloquent. It springs from a well of self-loathing. Mistakenly identified as incomprehensible, but to whom, I ask? Why is it when I am in my most distressed state, I am expected to communicate such horrors succinctly, logically, articulately? There are multiple ways to cry for help, and I am trying to converse with you in the most effective way I know how. I can't understand how you don't get it. If I could do it the way you wanted me to, I truly would, but I can't. Once again, I am aware of how much I disappoint you and others with my deficiencies, my incompetence, and my inherent badness. I would rather that you tried to help me navigate these channels of chaos with those all too brief moments we are together, to endeavour to speak to me in this language littered with the symbols of despair. You can introduce words of hope, admiration, and conviction that remind me that I am worthwhile. If we try hard, we can meet each other in some common understanding. Perhaps then we can both find our way back to where we want to be. You see, this thing you call psychosis and the subsequent symptoms, when categorised in a manual, are reduced to a collection of sanitised views of misery. Guidelines designed by the disaffected, a way to other, calculated to alleviate clinicians' anxiety. But manuals cannot capture the gamut of emotions that arise from a life of trespass, nor can it accurately describe the range of which a single sorrow can express itself, for this can only be done when informed by a narrative and the individual experience. When we try to rationalise someone else's pain, it only benefits the person who feels powerless to help. Distress is generated and driven by events in our lives that we cannot reconcile. These are lives affected in adverse ways, ways that damage the spirit and attack the authentic self. No person could be unaffected by the consistent destructive attacks on their human psyche. Human resilience becomes straitjacketed and the spirit starved and impoverished. Extraction from such a state requires superhuman strength. Knowing you have someone who is prepared to accompany you in this overwhelming pursuit is profoundly humbling. At a time when you can barely tolerate your own existence, having someone who is prepared to share each agonising step with you assures you that you are indeed someone of worth, someone who matters. Why else would anybody bother? Trauma produces a number of alarming and disturbing behaviours. But the most destructive consequence to deal with has to be feeling compelled to be silent, for fear of how others will react, including professionals. The tension around the possibility of my disclosure is palpable. What we must come to realise is trauma has no expiry date. To stay silent is to stagnate. There is no way I can prosper while shackled to the demons of my past. To not invite open dialogue, no matter how unpalatable the content, is a waste of my time, your time, organisational time, and a waste of my life. When trauma is expressed, it is the sound of screaming, of rage, of the anguish, of trust betrayed, of powerlessness, of unconstrained fear. Trauma resides in every cell of your being. There is no place of quiet contentment, no respite when you are being burdened with a mind and heart refusing to forget. When I am unable to voice my distress, the silence does nothing but force the problems to express itself on a deeper level, and I shall be left to howl at the moon, condemned to the padded cell of my lonely mind. I can be frustrated when I do not have the ability to access words to speak the unspeakable. But disembodied voices have mastered that dilemma a long time ago, so they burp out in coded form that which remains trapped inside. It does not come out as I would say it. It does not come out how I would express myself, but it comes out. It erupts from me not because I wish it, but because it can no longer be constrained. All that percolates such wickedness in my heart and mind. Oh, how my madness extracts delight in my humiliation and lack of control, whilst outwitting clinicians with their inability to interpret their true meaning. The eradication of the effects of trauma is neither a quiet nor dignified process. Maybe that is why so many clinicians do not wish to sully themselves with the more acrimonious ministrations of the human mind. Give us the nice anxieties and depressives, no blood, no shit, and no raised voices. We should be rejoicing in these raised voices, for they are the voices of liberation. They are the sounds of fresh understanding, the renaissance of reclaimed lives. They are my discharge papers, and who would not want to be part of that? Risk, both real and imagined, is documented at every turn. Our preoccupation with risk can influence practice, and its significance is demonstrated by the procedures and multitude of forms that accumulate in the cabinets of our organisations. but where on any hazard risk or serious incident form is the one enduring risk, that of remaining silent. For I need to scream and rage and thrash about, because when I give voice to it, it goes away. To progress in any noble endeavour takes courage, and it is courage that is required to embrace risk, to re-evaluate and redefine it, to see it for what it is, an opportunity. Without it, we will have no innovation, no bountiful exchanges, no succulent sweetness gleaned from new beginnings, no seedlings to germinate and produce healing landscapes. To speak up, to play a pivotal role in challenging the dominant culture, so when it no longer needs or exhibits the capacity to adapt, to evolve social remedies for people it professes to serve. So here's to the rule breakers, the round pegs and square holes, the ones who see things differently, the misfits, pains in the bum as they are, for they are the people who change the world. Thank goodness, I say, that there are those crazy enough to think they can make a difference, because invariably they are the ones who do. These are the people who know the value of risk-taking, living a life without a net. If our focus is on keeping safe, the world becomes an unpredictable and dangerous place of which we cannot protect ourselves. If we continue to instill feelings of powerlessness, we learn too soon our limitations. We never learn our powers. We must be promoting an atmosphere exemplified by validation, adulation, future promise, collaboration, fearlessness, a territory ripe for victories. We must grow environments which actively encourage people to speak of the many different rhythms of their lives. An environment in which we will marshal our combined forces. Look what we have achieved when we amalgamated the wisdom gained from the lived experience, from family members, and the variety of skills developed from those who choose to work in the area. You spent years obtaining your qualification, BAs, masters, doctorates. You are to be commended for your efforts and your commitment. Consider then that I have spent a lifetime acquiring my knowledge. With the same level of commitment that many of you have dedicated to your studies, I have lavished on the restoration of my life. The stakes for me so much higher and the rewards even greater. I regret I do not get to wear the flowing black gown nor the funny hat, because I think rituals are important. But I do get to live this extraordinary life, not free of madness, but enriched by the experience and flourishing under my own tutelage. You see, my learning is not because of a life dedicated by madness, but rather diligently campaigning for a life of my own choosing. I have embraced my frigidity and self-doubt. I have accepted the phantoms of my past. I have not seen them off, but I have laid them aside. I have reawakened my belief in myself and wallowed in the joy of existing. I have done this on my own because I had no choice. That in itself is not important, although it did make it harder. No, the important thing was that I had a choice. The biggest lie I ever came to believe was that as a result of my mental illness, my future was preordained and predetermined, an inevitable outcome from insurmountable determinants. This is a fraud and leads to a fraudulent life, a life robbed of autonomy and the privilege of citizenship. Credentialed as you are with your degrees, diplomas and owner's manuals, I then must lay out my own, for I am an absolute overachiever at being nuts. I hope that you can concede that I have a level of expertise that is worth honouring. I say this not with a sense of grandiosity, nor with any hint of condemnation, but with a generous heart and mind and a desire to share all that I have learnt. Please, let me help you. Together we will find what we do matters, that we matter. The gift of self-discovery, of revealing to people their deepest treasures waits. From today, we must commit to being architects of a brave new world. However we decide to progress our learnings, it must involve service users from start and in all areas. It must always be underpinned by love for the people we serve, and we must be strong and show a collective resolve. It is so important we nurture the upcoming new practitioners and expose them to the very best practices and crucial life-affirming attitudes, for the future lies with them, for they will help to shape our brave new world. They will be our change agents. We wish to equip them well, not only with techniques and knowledge of modalities, but sophisticated critical thinking skills and exemplary virtues. We are not that naive that when we see the rebranding, repackaging and procured the new stationery, that there are no remnants of our past which blight and continue to flavour today's practices. We must be forever vigilant, and this takes constant monitoring and decisive appraisals of practices and systems that support or impede effective practices alongside service users and family. We should with pride showcase to new practitioners our commitment to service users, family and the Consumer Clinician Family Alliance. It is time for service users to take responsibility for their own lives, to experience the dynamics of their existence in the world, no longer protected by well-intentioned clinicians. This is the era for service users to claim their role as citizens. You may be concerned about things going wrong for us. We will survive. We are not fragile. You're right though, we will get it wrong, but we learn from it and we can and will get it right. You have helped to equip me for just every eventuality. This is what we have worked together for. Remember that. The time to exercise and mature that internal locus of control. Let us be what we were always meant to be. How do I interpret this desperate clutching on when I am beginning to believe I can gain control of my life? It makes me question our relationship. When did you stop trusting me? When did you stop believing that things could be different for me? When did you fear of it going wrong, your fear of it going wrong override your commitment to my future? When did you decide playing it safe would help me to develop my confidence? When did you decide to disregard all the evidence and decide to invalidate my experience? When did you lose faith in all the things we talked about? When did the world we live in become devoid of risk? When did you stop believing in my ability to protect myself? When did you decide I wasn't worth it? But most of all, I've got to ask you, when did you lose faith in yourself? You who had seen me through such challenging times. You were fearless when you went head to head with my detractors. You advocated so effectively for me when your team wanted to put the brakes on what we were doing. You who shared tears with me at my losses and celebrated my successes, no matter how small. You who fronted up and talked to my family when they couldn't bear to hear the sound of my name. You who were steadfast and assertive when agencies tried to bamboozle me with incomprehensible systems. You, the only person who had the capacity to like me when I was at my best and at my worst. You who became my hero, my role model, my teacher, and my student. You have underestimated your impact on me. You have changed my world and how I see myself in it. Now let me live it. As an anarchist, I feel honour-bound to brush against the stringently imposed backlines of embarkation that seem to separate us from our most latent desires. I cannot always get them to budge, but I have learned that whilst the lines are drawn by others, it is me that gets to do the colouring in. And I choose to colour it with colours that communicate vibrancy and passion. We have an infinite palette of symbolic colours at our disposal, a glorious rainbow of colours that represent hope, of diversity, acceptance and love. These are what should colour our future. None of us can afford to capitulate when it becomes too difficult. We must not abandon our ideals when we find ourselves in a desert of despondency. This is the very time to be spurred into action. We cannot afford to wait for the rain. We must seek and create an oasis. I am privileged to work with an extremely hard-working, committed, compassionate, open-minded team who welcome, comment, debate and critique from all differing professional fields. Delighted and striving for optimum practice and devoted to the advancement of their profession and the subsequent advantages for service users. It is an atmosphere of mutual advantage, of validation. My contributions are keenly sought and appreciated, but more importantly for me, they are acted upon, not just patronised and then dismissed, but incorporated into strategies, research, projects and publications, the lifeblood of academia. I have discovered a previously unknown empire. I am no longer on the lower stratum of society. I am at the epicentre of influence and change. This is the kind of environment I would hope that all people would have a chance to work within. I wish to thank them publicly for their overwhelming endorsement, their inexhaustible enthusiasm, their unfailing encouragement, their generosity of knowledge and heart, and their fierce contention for my entitlement to be there. Having lived in a truly gated community, it is little wonder that we metaphorically climbed the walls through our madness. Our madness was a way to transcend the mundane and stifling atmosphere that permeated throughout the entire facility. Maybe the best way to avoid the trappings of madness is to not build the walls in the first place. Let us cease making incubators for madness, but rather promote and support service users, families and clinicians. Let us make it a priority to support service users to determine their own lives, acknowledging that there are many pathways to recovery. We must focus on creating healing environments, building community capacity, changing administrative structures that no longer reflect recovery principles and practices to ensure clinicians are not made vulnerable. Speaking to and mobilising people in an expectation of people reclaiming their lives. I recall being told by someone who knows these sorts of things that the meaning of therapists is to be a midwife to the soul. I liked that. And one thing I would like to leave you with is, it's time to deliver. Thank you.
Well, if you think that was pretty good, now think about trying to write a talk like that in the gaps between all that this conference is involved in 4 days from scratch. So I'm now going to turn our journal into a democratic journal and ask you how many people here think that talk should be reproduced in the next edition of Psychosis, word for word, if you're willing. Okay, so talking of things that were written during the conference, I'd just like to say to the people who wrote the poem, the collective poem, we're going to invite you to read it at 12:15 if you would like to. We have to get Debra out by exactly 12:15. She's got a taxi waiting to get her to Manchester Airport, so that I'm going to cut it off at exactly 12:15, and you'll see Debra run up that corridor. So open to questions. I'm going to try and prioritise people who haven't yet had a chance to ask, or I'm going to do my best to make sure people who haven't spoken get a chance to speak. And there'll be more chance to speak in the closing session as well, where we've got time to reflect on the whole conference. So we've got Alf and Jim. Questions or comments, please? Right there in the middle. Yep. Thanks, Alf. Over to you.
Hello, my name's Kat. Thank you for such a brilliant speech. I think for real change to happen, I think there needs to be joined up, visible and heard service user movement, and a movement from those with lived experience, including those in a professional mental health role.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Kat.
As a mother, as a therapist, I can't say how much I appreciate the thoughts you bring, the inspiration. It's made a huge difference in my life, in my son's life, and I just have to say thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Oh yes, thanks very much for that brilliant talk. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say we have the biopsychiatric social model. Personally, I belong to a group called Revision who advocates a social model of mental distress and mental health. So I hope it becomes really a social public health model, because I think upstream public health, having a fairer society and social justice, looking where the light is dark and messy, not where the light is good in terms of research, bringing about fundamental change. These are the essential things. So as I say, I'll just repeat, we need a social public health, emotional, psychological model. The social needs to be big, because the ideology of austerity since 2007, is just causing so much mental distress. In 1945, we were 10 times more in debt than the so-called 2007 crash. But in 1945, there was a contract. Dwayne Mackenzie was right when he spoke. There was a social contract. They wanted to promote a common good. They introduced the National Health Service. They introduced the social policies. This is what we need for mental health and mental distress. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Gillian Steggles. Deborah, I was very moved by your talk. Brilliant and wonderful to hear all the detail that all built up to the same end result. I just wanted to comment when you said that a tiger doesn't lose sleep counting sheep. William Blake pointed out that the origin of the tiger is the same as the lamb's in his poem, and I believe that tigers can look after sheep. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. I haven't met one that does, and we don't have tigers in New Zealand, so sorry. Cool. Oh, yeah.
I don't really quite know how to put this. I'm coming to the end of this 5 days, and I'm not really feeling inspired. I'm feeling kind of flat. Mm-hmm. I'll try and say what it is.
Yep.
And it may be pretty confused. What distresses me is that there's a sort of madness that's not in DSM-5, that's not often talked about, and it's the madness of being normal, and normal isn't just normal. We are all so stupidly normal that we can't see how bonkers it is. And I feel deeply frustrated by that, and I see how how much goodwill there is here, to create real positive change. But it feels to me like the biggest thing that's in the way well, I won't say the biggest thing that's in the way, but something that's really, really in the way is us, the very people who want to create the change, because we're infected with this, I don't know, it's like a modern Western disease. There's a kind of emptiness in our culture. You were saying something about a therapist being a midwife to the soul. And I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I really run with that. But I don't want my clients to be normal. I don't want to be normal. I don't think I am. I think I'm failed at being normal. So I don't know where I fit at all. But, this culture that doesn't recognize the deep struggle of people with psychosis, and the good people within it that want to change something, we're ourselves infected with this kind of, I don't know, this bleakness, this emptiness, and we're infected with greed, and the people at the top who seem to have most are the greediest, and they're always going to stop anything happening deeper down if they possibly can. So what do you do about that? We don't even talk about greed and what it's doing, and we're now, spreading out all over the whole world, and I despair about that. And I don't make what you will of that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I suppose in terms of normal, I think we could have a huge conference just on what's normal, because I actually call normal an extreme state. Okay, and I did my presentation on the extreme state of normal, so I think we could have a huge debate on what that is as well. And for myself, I suppose that I know it's easy to become despondent and weary of all the things that are going on, but for myself, if I reflect back on where we've come from, we have made huge gains. In fact, in lots of ways, in very short periods of time. So what I hold on to is the fact that if we have the capacity to do it, then we will continue to do it. It might not happen with us. It might be that we're at the end of our working lives and then, but what I feel enthused about and what keeps me going is actually the students. They don't even know half of the stuff that we've forgotten because they don't need to, because they have a very different philosophy and guiding principles as well. And they have, I think, a much stronger social conscience than we have. So I feel very positive for the future myself. And but I do understand that. And I find it when I come to places like this, because there's so many like-minded people, etc., that I don't feel that I'm quite literally howling at the moon. And it's about connecting with others. For me, it's about connecting with others. When I spent 18 years of my life locked away, who would have thought that I would be standing in a room? Could I imagine if I had have told my psychiatrist, give me a couple of years, I'll be standing in a room, there'll be a room full of people and they'll be listening to me, I would have had an IM before I hit the floor. Miracles do happen, and they happen every day in the smallest of ways, so treasure the small miracles. Okay.
Hello. I'm quite sure, I think people will agree, that power is a central issue in this field. Who's got the power, what they do with it. And I'd be interested in your comment on the fact that I think therapists can empower clients, but at a certain point, the clients have to take the power, disempowering the therapist, or the therapist has to step back and let go. And I'm interested in how to get that timing right, because ultimately they have to have the power.
And I tend to agree. And power and control is sort of very overt and covert within mental health systems as well. But I think on a one-to-one level, it's for me, when I felt it was time to move on, was when I was sort of thinking, shit, what crisis can I bring up to tell my therapist so I remained interesting to them? You know, because you see, you're not interested about things going right. You just want things to go wrong. So I have to create something. And when I started doing that, I used to think, maybe it's time to move on. And it's like a breakup. It's like a divorce. It's like you come to the person and say, it's not you, it's me. I'm actually all right now. I'm sorry. I'm ever so sorry. You know, I've looked at the DSM. It's shit. I'm not it anymore. Would you like me to be something else? Perhaps borderline, you know? Would you like me to do a few you know? And it, you know, when it got a little bit like that. And I think also, and I think service users need to take responsibility for that. I hear the power stuff all the time. I hear from clinicians, I've got no power. It's, you know, service users will say, clinicians have got all the power. Clinicians will say, management's got all the power. Management will say, it's the ministry that's got all the power. Remember, the ministry is servants of the people, and they'll say, no, it's the people who've got the power. And it's all, so we surrender power far too easily. And I say back to clinicians, the only power that really matters is the power we have when we're together. That's what's powerful. And the power that service users have is the most powerful thing of all, the power to heal themselves. That's it. You reclaim it. Power is not a bad thing. We often associate power with abuse. No, you give me all the power. When I feel powerful, I feel in control of the world. Okay, and then maybe I meet the DSM criteria yet again. But nonetheless, yeah, you go. So it's about claiming the power that we have rather than saying there is none.
I'm thinking if we do finish a few minutes early, it won't be the end of the world because we can watch Deborah walk out rather than run out. But is anybody who would like the last comment, or going once, going twice? All said. Yes. Okay. So wait for.